Today, we're going to explore how to turn off fight or flight, even if your brain won't listen. Welcome, George Haymaker. G'day. How you doing?
Good, Daniel. Nice to meet you and see you. And hello, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
One thing I want to learn about, George, is what did your alcohol addiction look like?
Well, it was ugly. It wasn't just alcohol, it was pain pills that brought me down at the end. So it was the combination of both. Um, and I had used alcohol and various forms of drugs for 30 years, coping with some underlying unhelpful mental patterns that had developed in childhood. And like many people, I carried those patterns with me into adulthood, and they weren't serving me very well. I was struggling with self doubt, quick to anger, um, feeling this need I had to prove myself to myself. Um, and, uh, and I chose the life of an entrepreneur. So it was really like pouring gasoline on a fire. I was already experiencing anxiety and self doubt. And then I put myself in this environment of a pressure cooker environment of being an entrepreneur, and it only exacerbated my symptoms. So I used alcohol and drugs to cope with those symptoms for the better part of 30 years until it got the better of me. And addiction is a very progressive disease, and it it converted over from being impulsive to compulsive, and I just couldn't stop at the end. And if I did, I would go through some serious withdrawals. And so I finally got to a point where I just was at the end of the road, and um, I had suicidal ideations and tried to act out a couple different scenarios. And finally, I decided that I would, um, try to rebound and figure out a different way. And so I went into rehab, and so it was really ugly. I was just out of options. My life as I knew it was over, and so I remember as clear as yesterday that I was sitting in rehab at the age of 52, kind of wondering how the hell I had gotten there and what, if anything, was going to be next. And I would just, at that point, was really desperate, was willing to try anything, just couldn't keep doing what I was doing. And so that started the process of renewing myself.
You mentioned alcohol and pills. What's easier to access?
What was easier to access?
Mm, the alcohol or the pills?
Well, I mean, alcohol is sold everywhere here. I I live in Napa, which is a beautiful part of the U.S. It's wine country. But at the end, I was buying plastic bottles of pop-off vodka out of Rite Aid, the drugstore down the street. So it's almost like I could have lived anywhere. The pills, I was initially being prescribed them for injuries I had sustained in athletics and surgeries I was having. But, I was consuming so many that I just couldn't get them fast enough from the doctors. And so I was going to the black market and paying exorbitant amounts of money. And so I would be driving an hour or more away to, you know, trying to get resupplied. At the end of my addiction, I was consuming 50 pain pills a day and drinking two full bottles of vodka. So I was going through a lot. And so I guess the alcohol was easier to obtain.
The alcohol also seems to be very sociably acceptable. And in Australia, the culture, and I know you've spent some time there, is alcohol's used as a reward. Just had a hard day at work. I've earned a beer. I've sold the house. I've earned a beer. I deserve a beer. We're going out for a nice night with the missus. We deserve a red wine. And it's accessible everywhere, the alcohol. Now, as soon as you're 18, it's just legal. And nobody really questions the amount that you drink. And sometimes it's celebrated. The more that you drink, the cooler you are. Your friends tell you, I like it when you drink. And it's always encouraged. When I went to live in the Middle East in 2007, to get alcohol, you had to go to a licensed venue. So it wasn't all that accessible. You had to go to a pub or a club, but then you couldn't have one drink and drive. It was zero tolerance. And the alcohol that was served was quite expensive. So it was a significant arm's length away from you. If you wanted to buy alcohol at that stage, legally you're required to have an alcohol license. And you'd have to go down to MMI, you'd have to take your license, you'd have to buy the alcohol. And if you didn't have a license, you couldn't get it. And you knew that if there was alcohol in the home and for some reason the police came around, you'd be in trouble. So again, it was at arm's distance. Other places that I knew, uh, I was working in Abu Dhabi, and people were driving from Abu Dhabi to Al Quwain. So they'd do almost a 250-kilometer round trip to get alcohol. That's how inaccessible it was. So for a lot of people, they just said, don't worry about it, out of sight, out of mind, and they move on. But in other places, it's so easily rewarded or accessed and then used as a reward. It's an interesting substance.
Yeah. Clearly, having accessibility to it removes any kind of barrier. So it makes recovery that much harder because, it's still all around you. And so one of the ways that, I was able to recover, and I recommend that others do, because at the end of the day, addiction is a pattern that we develop over time and we reinforce, um, because it solves a problem, because it is rewarding. The brain begins to like the pattern, as a very quick, efficient way to resolve a problem, which is, um, the nervous system being activated, being in a state of mental friction. And so, um, the brain falls in love with addictive substances because they are very rewarding. They're very high neurochemical, rewarding, uh, substances. They deliver more dopamine, the reward chemical, more dopamine than any other normal natural life pleasure. And so, if the brain is, attracted to reward, so it's always going to pursue, the avenue or the channel that gives it the most reward with the least amount of effort, because the brain is also wanting to conserve resources in the process because it's got a lot of work to do. So, um, the brain once um, once shown, uh, how effective, an external substance can be, will always default to it because it's the lowest cost, most effective form of, relief that it can find. And so that's why these addictive patterns are so hard to get out of, is because, there's nothing else like it for the brain. And if it's accessible and, you're surrounded by it, then there's very little, to keep you from trying to pursue more. And then we can get into it if you want, but there's other reasons why the brain finds it very difficult um, to stop using substances.
Mhm. You were mentioning before about some childhood experiences, and it appears that the more adverse childhood experiences we have, the more likely we're going to consume alcohol, use drugs, and even attempt self harm and suicide. What were some of the adverse childhood experiences that you went through that have contributed to the root cause of the alcoholism?
Yeah. So I was, the son of parents who were old fashioned in the sense that they believed in physical discipline. So, um, when I misbehaved, I got physically disciplined, significantly so. We also moved around a lot. So my dad was a corporate executive, and through his success, he was very successful. We were moving about every year into a new city, new school. And so I was very unstable. I was always having to say goodbye to friends, meet new friends, and being the new kid all the time, I became very uncomfortable in my own skin. And so I began to, um, as a result of my discomfort, act out a lot, get angry, um, and the more I acted out, the more I got punished. And so I began to question my worthiness. My parents moved to Australia, your home, when I was in ninth grade. And I stayed here in the US and went to boarding school. So I was kind of fending for myself from ninth grade on. And then I suffered some sexual abuse from older boys growing up. And so the combination of all of those things, I was pretty uncomfortable. And in addition to that, I had a lot of addiction in my family. My mom's entire side of her family were addicts. And so, to your point, when you have adverse childhood experiences and addiction, genetic predisposition to addiction, it doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be an addict. But when you have adverse childhood experiences on top of genetic predisposition to addiction, those genes for addiction will express. And what happens in the case of people that have genetic predisposition is they don't experience reward the same way normal people do. Our reward networks don't function properly, so we don't experience the same level of reward from normal life pleasures. And so we kind of go through life a little flat. And so when you experience something with high level of dopamine, like a substance, you're like, wow, this is what I've been missing all my life. And so, um, it becomes even more attractive. So if you've had adverse childhood experiences, your your nervous system's activated a lot because you're always under threat, and that's a very uncomfortable feeling. And it's summoning stress chemicals all the time as in response. And so you're looking for relief, anything to get rid of those uh, mental patterns that aren't comfortable. And so the combination of all of those things, when you find addictive substances, make it a very attractive alternative and hard to move away from.
Mhm. A lot to go through. There's an old saying that repressed emotions never die, they just come out in uglier ways. And as you were growing up, that anger, what did that look like? Because a lot of people say, Daniel, I'm not an angry person. Well, anger's not always expressed externally, it can be felt or expressed internally. What did the anger look like for you in the younger years?
Yeah, mine did come out externally as well as internally. Um, it was one of those things where I would just be overcome with it, explosive, uh, to the point where it was just not controllable, and it almost like I didn't even know where it came from. I was my nervous system was so activated all the time. I perceived everything as threat. Um, that it didn't take much for me to go from where my baseline was, nervous system wise, because it was always activated, to an expression of um, extreme anger. It wasn't very far to go from one point to the other. And so um, it's another form of a pattern as a way of survival, as a way of coping, as a way of releasing these very uncomfortable feelings. Um, and so people find different ways to express and to cope. There's no one size fits all. Mine was to blow it off. Um, and and so yeah, I mean, I would just feel this overwhelming escalation, like from 0 to 10 instantly, of of a rising mercury, and then it would express itself, and just intensity, um, to the point where it just became really unhelpful. So, if I failed at something, um, lost a game, which only exacerbated the feelings of self doubt, um, it would express itself. Um, like if I identified with anything, and like I remember getting super angry when my teams would lose that I wasn't even a part of, like professional teams that I followed. Um, and my parents would look at me like I was nuts, getting angry over something I had no control over. But I identified so much with it because I was struggling with my own identity. So I was attaching myself to anything else that I could try to identify with. Um, and so, I carried these patterns with me into adulthood, and they never, and that's what patterns do. So that's what patterns are. They're brain patterns that we develop at an early age to meet needs. Um, and a lot of times those patterns are not helpful or functional. But because we continually reinforce them and reenact them, they get stronger. And whenever there's emotion attached to them, emotion is like super glue to a pattern. It tells the brain that this pattern is super important to us. It's meaningful. Okay. And so the brain prioritizes meaningful patterns. And so, what happens is that when we experience things in life, and that experience, that data that comes in through our senses, like let's say I lost another game, because I had had this pattern that had been so well reinforced and developed. What the brain does is it goes to our past experiences and says, what have I experienced in the past that resembles what I'm encountering right now? And how did I deal with it in the past? And the brain brings forward that template as its model of how to handle this situation, not because the brain doesn't have any ability to decide what's right and wrong, what's good or bad, what's happy or healthy, any of that. It only knows what you've done before that got you through the moment. So that's why so many of us reenact patterns that are unhelpful, is because that's all the brain knows. And we've practiced it and reinforced it. And the brain, its only job is to keep us safe, in survival, alive, um, predict the future, and keep life predictable so that we can stay alive and conserve resources in the process, because the brain is super busy. It's always looking to predict the future efficiently and move on. Okay. And so that's why it's willing, and that's why it's designed to pull these patterns from the past, no matter if they're good or bad, happy or sad. They just pull the patterns because that's all it knows. That's what it's been trained to do. And so what we need to do as people is decide at some point. And I told you when I had to decide, which is when it was really far down the path, when the consequences had been piled up real high. But we all have to decide at some point in our lives when the patterns are no longer helpful and enough is enough. Okay. And at that point, um, we can we can begin to understand how the brain works, and learn that the brain is adaptable, changeable, and evolvable. So uh, our brains aren't fixed. They're all they are is 85 billion neurons that have formed themselves in patterns in a map that represent our past experiences. But because they move around and have patterned themselves before, they can pattern themselves again if we show them something different. Okay. And so that's the process of neuroplasticity, where um, we can take these patterns, uh, figure out where they came from, make sense of them, be aware of them, detach from them, and look at them not as us, but as patterns. And so create some distance. And then work on loosening the grip that they have in our on our brains. And there's exercises that you can do that that loosen the grip. And then we can begin to install new patterns in place of those that help meet the needs that the old patterns are trying to meet, but no longer doing very well because they're dysfunctional. And so that's what I do is I help people um, take their mental experience, decide what's helpful, what's not, and we then look at the unhelpful parts, find out where they came from, loosen the grip they have on their brains, and then design new patterns to put in their place, all tethered to a identity that they want for themselves. So the identity that people have is something that's been built and constructed over time. And but it doesn't have to be what it is right now. It can be anything. And so it's very much like an actor that goes to a director, tries out for a movie, gets the part, and the director says, "Here's your script, here's your character, go learn it." And so then this person has to go away and figure out who this character is, how they think, how they feel, how they emote, everything about them. And then they have to practice that person and be like them. Okay. And so that's what we're doing when we're shifting somebody that's struggling is we're designing, and it's fun because we get to design anything we want, and we get to create this perfect person in their mind's eye, the person that they've always wanted to be. Okay. And it's complete with their values, their virtues, their traits, their belief systems, all these things that they'd like to have. um, and then once we have that character delineated, and then we set up a lifestyle that reinforces it. And so every day they just go about thinking, feeling, and acting like that's like this new person. And over time, what happens is these old patterns that are in the brain, they begin to weaken because we're not engaging in them anymore. And what engaging means is that every time you think, feel, or act in a certain way, there is neurochemical and electrical signaling going through this string of neurons in your brain that causes the thought, emotion, and action to happen. It's what conjures into the consciousness. Okay. But if you stop doing a pattern intentionally, then there's no more chemical or electricity running through it. So by definition, uh, because you're not strengthening it, it's weakening. And so if you don't do a pattern long enough, it will weaken the neuron. The brain then looks at that pattern and says, this guy hasn't used this old pattern for 2 years now. He must not need it. And so in the world of efficiency, which is what the brain's all about, it will look at old patterns and say, if he doesn't need it, we're going to break these neurons apart and move them somewhere else and use them again in a new pattern that he's going to develop down the road. And so that's what neuroplasticity looks like. It's shedding, like a snake would shed skin. We're going to shed unhelpful patterns, replace them with new ones, and only activate the patterns that we want to reinforce this new identity. Sorry, I just got excited and went on, but hopefully that's helpful.
Excitement's good, and I understand why they call it happy hour.
Without
I
the
used to
booze.
work at a hotel, and it was called Richmond Inn. And at 4 p.m. every day, it was happy hour, and I could see the anger and frustration building up in these men, and it was almost hitting boiling point at 3:59. But happy hour starts at 4 p.m. They grab a beer, and their emotional temperature would cool right down. And it was interesting to watch that pattern because there was a certain amount of beers. It might have been two or three. If they had two or three beers, they were really chilled, really mellowed. They got everything off their chest from work or at home, and they'd leave happy. But the ones who went past happy hour, the pub would turn into a bloodbath. So they go 4 beers, 5 beers, 6 beers, 7 beers, and that anger would start to come out in an ugly way. But there's like you were saying here, there's been a reward. The emotion, well, the behavior of drinking alcohol with a little bit of that super glue of happiness, it's an interesting reward. And as you're talking about your experience there, it's something that sounds like it's very unique for each individual. On the journey before they seek help, what's the part that most people take in terms of trying to fix this problem themselves? What did you attempt to do to solve that problem on your journey before you got to this point of neuroscience? Did you use an
Well,
affirmation? I'm healthy. I don't drink. I'm powerful. What did you go through?
yeah, I'm not sure that I knew for a while it was fine. I mean, for many years I was able to binge, cope that way, and not suffer consequences. But after a while, you start doing damage, to your brain. Um, Other consequences pile up, um, and every person has to recognize it, is there a reason to change? Are things difficult enough to change? Are they experiencing some kind of friction related to what they're doing that causes them to want to change? And what what we're fighting against is a brain that doesn't really want to change. It's not designed to want to change. It will change, but we have to be the ones to guide it into change. Because
So
again,
it's
the
a
brain,
it's a poor master, but a very good servant.
yeah, because again, the brain wants predictability. And so when you suggest to it that we should go do something different than it's ever done before, like stop drinking, um, think about it from the brain's perspective. All
Yeah,
it wants
take
to
my
do,
dopamine away from me.
yeah. So it wants to keep life predictable. So right now it knows that George gets angry a lot, and we found a pattern that somehow resolves it and keeps him alive. Now, it happens to be drinking a lot, but it doesn't want to consider stopping drinking because it doesn't know what it's going to do with all this anger. Okay. It doesn't know if that's going to be safe. It doesn't know if it's going to be rewarding. It doesn't know how many resources it's going to take. It doesn't know. It's uncertain. And so uncertain is the antithesis of predictability. And so all the brain wants is the ability to predict. And that's all it does all day long is it takes in data before you're even aware of it through your senses, and it's matching it up against what it's seen before to predict what's about to happen. Otherwise, you would get killed many times over during a year if your brain wasn't designed to do this, because it's always ahead of you predicting what's about to happen. Okay, so it's a good thing. But in the case of unhelpful patterns, it's not, because it doesn't care if the patterns you're currently engaged in are painful or causing consequences. All it knows is that somehow you've lived through it. So it just wants to keep running the same patterns. And so that's why, if you've ever tried to change anything, lose weight or anything, um, it's hard because your brain automatically resists it, um, for those very reasons I just laid out. And
Mm.
so, um, you know, the other the other thing that you're fighting against in addiction is that the amount of dopamine that you get from these substances is so much higher than normal life pleasures that what happens is that you take a substance, your dopamine levels spike really high, really fast, and then um, when you're not doing it, it drops very suddenly, and it will. The further you go down the addiction trail, um, the dopamine levels will drop so far, so fast that that's what withdrawal is. Okay, and then you feel like crap, and then you'll do anything to get rid of that feeling, and so you'll do more of the drugs or alcohol. And so that's why there's this um, yo-yo effect, and you get in these cycles where dopamine spikes up really high, really fast. You stop doing it, it drops, and it drops even further below a normal homeostasis amount, and enough to like you feel like hell. And so then you'll do more just to get rid of that. And you have to keep doing more because tolerance starts to take effect, where your brain starts to shut down and you need more of the substance to have the same amount of high. And so that's the insidious cycle of addiction.
Mm. Chasing the dragon.
Exactly.
Even in sports, we have addictions. It happened to me with wakeboarding. I wakeboarded and competed for 10 years, and at the start, you'd have an adrenaline rush when you were trying a new trick. There was so much adrenaline going through the body because you didn't know if you were going to land or crash. If you crashed, you knew it was going to hurt, but you still wanted to get up and try again. If you landed it, you knew you were going to get that big dopamine rush and the excitement, and everybody else and the serotonin would spike. But after you mastered that trick and you'd done it 100 times, you become a little bit numb to it. That trick that you'd tried so hard to do at the start just become part of your normal everyday repertoire. So the next thing was, what's the next trick? How do I go bigger? How do I hit it harder? How do I go further out in the flats? And you trace chasing that feeling once again. And eventually you get it. And then you go back through that pattern of addiction. Okay. That high is now a low. I need to find something bigger and better. And what I found in the sport is you keep pushing yourself so hard until you physically get injured because you're going so far out of your comfort zone. You're going so much faster. When we started riding, we might have ridden on 65 foot of rope and the boat was going at maybe 20 miles an hour. And towards the end of our careers, we're riding on almost 90 foot of rope and a boat that's doing 28 miles an hour. Why? Because you want to go higher, you want to stay up in the air longer. And when you land it, the rush was bigger. And I felt that in sports before. I think we also have it in our careers. We start a career, we get really excited, we're living the dream every single day, and then we forget that we're in the dream. So we try something to get a little bit more excitement. Maybe it's a promotion, maybe it's a new skill set that we learned. Constantly trying to get that energy there. You were mentioning in some of your work that people don't struggle because of a lack of discipline or motivation. What do they really struggle with?
Um, well, I find that, um, you know, people are struggling with identity, mental friction of all different types. Um, and so whether it's mental friction caused by these unhelpful patterns that they brought with them, or um, their their brain is predicting one identity that they've developed to the point that they're in, but they're at a place in their life where things have shifted and they want to be different. And so it's that chasm between who they really want to be, um, and who they've been. And again, unless we realize that, um, you know, we and our brains are separate, our brains are basically vestiges that represent our past, and we are the ones looking forward. And what our relationship with our brains needs to be is that, we need to be the ones that build coherence with our brain, that bring it forward, and cultivate it and nurture it into being the person that we want to be. And so I just think there's a lot of out of alignment that goes on with people wanting to be one thing, but their brains continue to predict something that they've been in the past. Um, so that's a lot of the struggle that I encounter is, people that are experiencing friction of various types, either from patterns that they brought with them, or differences between where they've been and where they want to go, or a lot of resource imbalance also. People that are putting demands on their brain that far exceed the mental resources that they're supplying it with. So a lot of people don't realize that the brain, it's a 2 pound organ that consumes 25% of our energy. It's working 24/7, and it isn't just self-sufficient. Like, it requires raw materials, and resetting, and it has limited finite resources every day. And yet we just want to push it, push it, push it, and it's not capable of that. And so then we experience um, irritability, fatigue, brain fog, all different types of mental symptoms that are basically the brain saying, hey, dude, you're asking far more of me than the resources that you've given me to supply and meet the demands that you're asking of me. So a lot of what um, I help people with is understand that and build a lifestyle that supplies the brain with what it needs in order for it to give back to the person what it is that they're demanding, but also then how to communicate with their brain. Anytime there's mental friction in the brain is just giving you signals. It's like when your baby cries because it's gone to the bathroom in its diaper or it's hungry. Your brain is, when it has mental friction, it's communicating with you, telling you something's wrong. And so instead of like pushing harder through it, um, we need to stop and listen and say, okay, I've done something wrong here. I haven't been considerate. And so I need to figure out what it is. What's causing this friction, and what do I need to do to address it? Um, it's just it's very short-sighted, poor strategy to say, my brain should just be there doing what I need it to do whenever I need it to do it. Um, that is just ignorance. And that this one organ that will determine our success in life, and everybody wants success and they want happiness and fulfillment, but that one organ, I find that most professionals don't have any idea how it works. None. I mean, we're talking about smart people that know a whole lot about a whole lot of subject matter. But when it comes to understanding the operating system that's going to actually deliver what success looks like to them, they have zero idea. And so that mystifies me because, well, I was the same guy, so it really doesn't mystify me. But that's what I encourage is, let's stop and learn, uh, you know, how this most important organ, the most important organ we have in our body, how does it work, so we can manage it, so that we can actually achieve the success that we want to achieve. You know, I mean, we give more, like, we'll put scanning software and things on our computer to make sure it doesn't get a virus. But what are we doing for our brain to make sure it doesn't get a virus? The brain has every right, as much right to catch a cold, get injured, get sick as any other part of our body. But somehow we think that um, there's a stigma attached to having mental health issues. That's all mental health issues are, is unattended, um, you know, misallocation of resources, misunderstanding of resources, um, not paying any attention to what the brain's trying to tell us, not giving it any care or attention. That's what it is. And so, we put cream on our skin. We do all kinds of things to take care of every other part of our body, and yet we just, the thing that works the hardest of all of us, the brain, we do not take care of.
Well, I paid $3,000 for my Mac computer. I better keep it safe from viruses. But this brain I got for free, so I won't take care of it.
Yeah,
Something for
right.
nothing. People with addiction, any type of addiction. Uh, I've never met somebody with an addiction, healthy or unhealthy, that's not motivated. I see people with addictions doing whatever it takes to get that thing that they're chasing. And if it's an alcoholic, they will work hard all day to make the money to get the alcohol. You can't question their motivation. If it's substance, I've seen people earning three and four and $5,000 a week to fund their $2,000 a week substance habit. Never question their motivation. Athletes, they will work a job that they don't like. They will labor on the weekends. They'll pack shelves at night to fund their sporting. They're addicted to sport. I don't think we can ever question their level of motivation. They're probably some of the most motivated people on the planet because it's like that survival. They need it to survive, whatever it's giving them. Do they lack discipline? How could you question somebody's level of discipline if they can drink alcohol every day? People can't go to the gym every day, but then you get these people who can drink alcohol every day. That's discipline. How is it that you can wake up every day and do that without motivation, without discipline? You do it every day. It's like the athlete who trains rain, hail, or shine. He's addicted, he's got discipline. The substance user who's going to avoid the cops, stick that condom up his bum, tell me he's not disciplined to get those drugs. He'll do whatever it takes, he'll learn whatever he needs to get the hit. So I don't think we can question their discipline or motivation. Maybe there's a problem with willpower, but that's a very different type of conversation. I think sometimes for me, willpower is I say to my children, don't bring chocolate home. If you put chocolate in the fridge, I will eat it. It's not discipline. I'm a very disciplined person. It's not motivation. I'm highly motivated. But the willpower, there's something in that chocolate where I can't say no. So I say, don't put it in the fridge. Or you're going to have to complain because dad's going to eat it. So, struggling with identity. I know in the Australian culture, the boys, when they get big, you call them big boy, and they like it. I'm the big boy. I'm the big guy. We've had friends there who drink, and he's the guy who can scull the beer the fastest. It's like this identity, and he gets rewarded every time he sculls the beer. When we were growing up, people would get rewarded for being the loosest unit. Ah, he drank more beers than anybody else. He drove home. He did all this stuff, and it gets rewarded. So, giving up the alcohol or the substance, you've also got to give away that identity. And you've got to ask yourself the question, well, who am I? And the brain might, like you were saying before, it wants to predict the future. Well, if you're nobody in the future, who are you? Why would you give that up? If you've got to give up the identity, that's a tough one.
Yeah. Um, so then it gets back to, you know, deciding, is that what you want your identity built around? Is, substances? Or is there something, a deeper calling that you have? And typically identity is built and constructed out of values, virtues, traits, beliefs, strengths, all in service of meeting some basic needs that we all have as human beings: the ability to feel autonomous, equal, significant, skillful, stable, and together with others. Those are kind of the core psychological needs that we all have. And the identity is a set of patterns that we develop to meet those needs. Um, so, um, Generally speaking, we all develop over time certain values that we guiding lights that we want to live by, things that are deeply meaningful to us. And so, um, that's the objective here, is to figure out what those things are, get in touch with them, and then craft and construct a life in support of those. Um, because, frankly, having a life built on consuming lots of alcohol isn't very meaningful. It's not intrinsically rewarding. Um, and so um, that's a, in my mind, that's a pretty purposeless, meaningless existence. And so, um, yeah. And so that's what I try to help people do again, is get in touch, because a lot of us don't really think about our identity. We think about, we develop it over time through a set of patterns, in any way we can to meet these needs, but we don't sit there and think, am I really living the life that I want to? Am I being the type of person that I want? Um, or, you know, am I not? And so I knew in my own experience that, sitting in rehab, that I was not, that's not who I wanted to be. I did not want to go out from this world being a drug addict. And so I was able to summon the wherewithal to try to identify who that person was that I wanted to be. I wasn't even sure yet, but I knew I wanted to go about the work to try to find out. And so it's really clarifying for ourselves and for our brains when we can really define who this person is that we want to be and build a life that supports that every single day, that reinforces all those patterns that help us meet those needs, using an identity that we're proud of.
One thought, through your experience, dignity was taken away through physical and sexual abuse. What about with this process of overcoming addiction if we just got our dignity back? Would that help?
Yeah. Um, so, what we're trying to do in addiction is wean off the substance and retrain the reward network that's only been getting reward from the substance. Because while we're using the substance, no other pleasure in life compares to it. Not only that, but the brain stops producing dopamine for natural life pleasures because none of it matches up, none of it measures up. So we stop experiencing any pleasure from, you know, normal things if we're not actively on a substance. And so what we need to do is um, come off the substance, allow time for the brain to heal and to begin to retrain the reward network to enjoy and release dopamine for normal life pleasures. Things like, being together with our friends, having a loving relationship, having sex, having, good food, being healthy, exercising. The other things in life that used to give us these normal life pleasures, we're now needing to retrain the brain on how to release dopamine for those things. And so it's really an issue around creating enough time away from the substance, so those patterns stop getting reinforced, while introducing new forms of reward, natural life pleasures that we can begin to re-experience again. And then the brain remarkably will heal itself and start to release dopamine for those things that we used to get. And so, this idea of dignity um, is a rewarding, living in accordance to our values, being proud of ourselves, is intrinsically rewarding. There's nothing more deeply rewarding than being proud of ourselves, proud of the person we are. I mean, you feel it when you feel good about yourself in a healthy way. Like, you feel this summoning of, like, goosebumps and this warming sensation. That's serotonin. Okay. That's what that feels like. And so in recovery, what we try to do is move away from dopamine, these pleasure spikes, and focus more on well being, things that are deeply rewarding, that come up from within. Okay. So it's almost like a retraining of the whole um, reward system in the brain, where you're moving away from the the coping, finding relief. Like, instead of trying to find relief, you're trying to find motivation through healthy sources. And so it's a whole different, and we're just having to retrain the brain to do that because it's hasn't been working properly for however long.
That intrinsic motivation to feel dignity, to feel pride in yourself. those things, once you get them back, they can't be stripped away. And there's no cap to it. You can find many things to love about yourself on a daily basis. You can find so many things to be proud about. And that internal high from that serotonin, that feel good, that you're becoming the best version of yourself, that's a very healthy addiction. And I've seen people come out of alcoholism and substance abuse and they start to go to the gym. They start to get some compliments. They start to make some new friends. They start to change the way that they dress. You can see that their thinking patterns change. They start to feel different about themselves and others. And quickly they get out of that toxic environment and find a healthy environment. And as soon as they get a little bit of traction and they get a feel for that intrinsic motivators and they get fired off, they quickly become a very different person. And I find that their, if we could call it a recovery, happens really fast. You know, it might have taken them 30 years to develop that old pattern, but the turnaround can happen so quickly, days and weeks. And you can see it in them. They glow.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I like to think in the training that I do, it's like 90 days and you are well down the path. Now it depends, is addiction a part of it or not? But even with addiction, like you are pretty much through the physical and psychological withdrawals in 90 days. And you can be, while that's happening and you're away from the substance, you are building new patterns associated with, um, healthy pleasures, and you're training your reward network to be motivated by those. And as you say, it's a very gradual reinforcing process. And the brain learns through repetition. So if you can build a lifestyle where daily you're in these healthy patterns, you're reinforcing them, you're getting reward from them, you're experiencing reward, the brain begins to realize that these are safe, low cost, low metabolically cost pursuits. So it begins to relax and welcome these new things because it's no longer concerned about your safety. Um, it's no longer concerned if this new direction is threatening. It becomes predictable because you're engaged in it every day. And so the brain starts to relax and pursue these things because they are proving to be much more pleasurable and rewarding in a variety of ways than your old patterns. And so then at some point, and it's happening gradually, there's no light switch. But to your point, like within 60, 90 days, you can be, experiencing a whole new way of life, building momentum, um, to where, if you just stay with it and keep your nervous system regulated so you're not activated to where what can happen is if your brain detects threat, um, or it's activated overly in some way, shape, or form, the stress can cause an old pattern to resurface, and that's why people relapse. So they may put themselves in a stressful situation that will trigger the old pattern because these new ones aren't reinforced enough, and you haven't really dealt with the stressful situation, and the brain suddenly reverts back to its old patterns because it's the only one that it knows will work for sure. And that's why people will relapse. So staying out of stress, staying out of nervous system activation is critical in the early days of recovery. Um, and then having plans if something happens where you are put in that position, knowing immediately what you're going to do as a response, because you can't be left wondering and allow your brain to make the decision for you. You have to have a plan, an immediate go to. So,
What's your thoughts on the importance of sleep when it comes to recovering from addiction?
It's critical, not only recovering from addiction, but just in everyday life. So, this whole idea about making sure your brain is properly resourced, um, has enough mental. So, think of your brain as a fuel tank, and you only have a certain size fuel tank in a day of resources. Those resources are things like uh, glucose, and oxygen, which will make up the brain's energy, which is ATP, neurotransmitters, which are things like the calming chemical, the focus chemical, the alertness chemical, the motivation chemical, and so on. And then the minerals, which you get from food or electrolytes, which cause the neurons to open and close on a timely basis to allow thinking to occur in sync and in a speedy way. So processing speed and also bandwidth. So if you're an athlete, you'll relate to this that you know you just can't go out and run 100 miles every day. Your body only has so much. Your muscles only have so much bandwidth, and then they've got to stop. Your brain, the same thing. So this tank of resources is finite. Now, you can work over time to expand the size of that tank through training. Work, like same way you would build muscles in a gym, you can build bandwidth. You can fuel your brain by eating properly, hydrating properly with electrolytes, eating the right combinations of food at the right times of the day. But at the end of the day, you have to sleep because the brain has a number of functions that it does at night while you're sleeping. It's still working. Okay. It's consolidating all the memories, it's sending up fluid from your body, the lymphatic system into your brain to clean out all the waste and the toxins. Um, you need 4 to 5 90-minute sleep cycles at night for your brain to reset. So basically, all of the nighttime functions that need to happen in the brain take a certain amount of time. Okay, you can't shortchange it. Otherwise, you wake up and your brain hasn't fully reset, and then you're entering the next day with less than a full tank of resources. So when you feel tired or agitated or whatever else, you can't think properly. Guess what? Because you didn't sleep enough, guess what? Your brain didn't reset, your tank's not full. Okay. And so um, it's absolutely critical that you allow your brain to reset, because otherwise you're fighting from behind. You're always at a resource deficit the next day because your demands probably aren't less, and so you're basically trying to drive a car 300 miles with only 200 miles of fuel in it, right? It's not going to happen. And so then what happens when you're out of resources and the demands are still coming in? Guess what happens? Your brain summons, it activates your nervous system, says, yo, I'm out of resources, you're still demanding from me, I need to pull them from somewhere. So it summons stress, and then it starts pulling adrenaline uh, and cortisol and other stress chemicals from your adrenal glands to supplement the resources that aren't there to do what the demands are need. And so now you're operating in stress. Okay. And so now, you're flooding your brain with these unhealthy chemicals. Um, it's uncomfortable. There's mental friction. It doesn't feel good. And the longer you stay in it, the worse it gets. And it forms anxiety. And so, you know, it all starts with a great night's sleep. Okay. In order to manage this tank of resources and get it as full as possible to start every day.
So sleep's important. What about the impact of long term alcohol or substance abuse on the immune system? Are people who are using alcohol or substance on a regular basis more likely to get sick or suffer other illnesses or disease?
Yeah, because it's affecting the gut biome, and we're learning more and more about the connectivity between the gut and the brain. There's a direct line of communication. There's nerves that run, directly from the gut to the brain, And so our immune system lives in our gut, and in order for it to operate correctly, it needs healthy bacteria, probiotic, to police the stomach and make sure that it's eating away at all the things that are could possibly damage the immune system. Um, and so alcohol, and also generally when we're drinking, we're not eating properly, and so the combination of those two things causes an unhealthy gut system, which therefore means that more toxins and harmful um, radicals can damage the immune system. And so it all ties together in one contiguous system. Our entire body and brain are all working together, communicating with one another. Our nervous system, which is one of the primary modes of communication, um, is multifaceted. There's different branches of it, but it's running from our fingertips and our toes all the way up into our brain. They're all of our nervous system branches are all connected to one another, feeding and signaling information.
I've I've read reports before that say that one glass of alcohol in the evening can interrupt 4 hours of sleep. That's one glass. So the cost is high. One glass of alcohol impacts your sleep. If you have two or three, virtually, like you were saying before, you're not getting those 4 or 5 90-minute sleep cycles. That doesn't happen. Your gallbladder's agitated when you go to bed. That impacts your confidence. Your liver gets agitated, like the anger starts to attack the liver at between 1 and 3 in the morning. And so you toss and turn all night. The anxiety comes in and you've got those ruminating thoughts, end of the world scenarios. The stress kicks in. You wake up, you can't get back to sleep. You get back to sleep, you wake up, and you're never getting to that deep sleep. And then, even if we just have 4 to 5 poor nights' sleep, that's enough to put us in a pre diabetic state. And I've never met somebody who's addicted to substance or alcohol who looks healthy. Their skin looks horrible. When I used to work in the pub, these guys who were 40 looked 70. Women who were 25 already looked like they'd been around the block 50 times. They didn't look healthy. And the other thing was they were always sick. You could see it in the body, inflammation. They didn't move freely. They didn't flow. Getting up onto that bar stool was it was a lot of effort. I've never seen alcohol or substance be an advantage in that situation. And for me, myself, I've done a lot of travel in my life, and I was flying backwards and forwards from the United Kingdom to Taiwan as I built my business. And there was some times where I was extremely jet lagged, and I'd go to the cupboard and I'd pull out a glass of scotch to try to accelerate the sleep onset. It didn't work. I was still eyes open at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But what I'd experience is if I had a drink, I would always end up sick. Within the next 4 or 5 days, I had a cold and flu every single time. It didn't help me at all. So nobody can try to convince me that there's actually any benefits. Even if I drink alcohol, I don't dance better, and my wife can tell you that as well. Doesn't make me dance any better.
Was that right? That's
Some
the
people
one thing I
dance better.
can claim is it used to make me dance better, or a little less self-consciously, I guess, but not enough to go back.
I've we don't drink a lot in our family periodically, if any. And what I've found is that when I was younger, I'd give it a nudge. It was good fun. Had a lot of fun. But I also used to get really frustrated going out on a Friday night and ruining a Saturday. Going out on a Saturday night and ruining Sunday. And the punishment was you felt like shit and you never enjoyed the weekend. You never rode well on the wakeboard with a hangover. You never performed well at the competitions with a hangover. When I was selling real estate, if we'd go out on Wednesday night after our TAFE course and come back to list and sell on Thursday, It never worked in my favor. But now as I get older, I'm like, I don't want to ruin a Sunday. I don't want to wipe myself out on a Saturday. That peace of mind, that mental clarity from not drinking alcohol is far superior than what one drink could possibly give me. And I think once we get back to that taste of the good life where you wake up and you feel fresh, there's no brain fog, there's no inflammation in the body, you got a bit of pep in your step, you want to keep it that way.
Yeah.
Want to keep it.
Also, we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we're trying to escape, even with one drink? Like, what is it about our current mental state um, do we want to get away from? You know, and and so that's where really developing this relationship with your brain and understanding where it's at, what it needs, what it's trying to tell you. Um, there's other ways to calm a nervous system. Um, if that's what we're using alcohol for, you hear the expression, "Oh, I really need a drink." Well, what that is I need relief because my nervous system's activated for some reason.
And
And
there's going to be
so,
three things: people, places, or things.
yeah,
Who are the people in your environment that's triggering stress?
and- right.
What's the
And our
place? And
perception, yeah,
what's the place? Where are you going that makes you feel that like shit that you need a drink? Or what are the things that you're doing? It's pretty simple if we can break it down and figure out the root cause. People, am I in the wrong relationship? Most people are. Most people aren't in a healthy relationship, and if your relationship's causing you to use alcohol, maybe you've got to get the relationship sorted out as well. Places, people spend their lifetime doing a job just to pay bills. And if you've got to go in there every day and you've got that accumulated stress, of course you're going to look for a way out. Well, there might be things that you're involved in. People are buying so much stuff these days to impress people that they don't even like. It's like people spending $15,000 on a watch to try to impress somebody who's got a $10,000 watch, somebody that you don't even like. Getting into debt for cars that, these guys who spend $100,000 on a car and a woman looks at it and goes, I don't even know what it is. They're trying to impress the boys. Or even living in a place and getting a mortgage on a property that makes you work a job that you hate just to pay the mortgage. Three things: people, places, or things. Sort that out. And at least that's going to give you some light of how to get out of that and not to have to use a different coping mechanism.
right. And then you build your identity around those things, acquiring things because you feel like that's what's going to satisfy your needs.
Hmm.
And yet you find that you get a thing and the reward is very short lived. And so then it's on to the next thing. And you keep chasing something that you hope will give you that thing. And it never does. And so that's why understanding intrinsically what you're all about, what makes you tick, the type of person you want to be, and then building your life around that is a long lasting, ongoing, rewarding, serotonin producing, well being, uh, thriving type of existence where, you know, it's intrinsic versus extrinsic. Like you're never going to find meaning out of getting that next thing.
Takes a long time to get to the intrinsic. Where I used to live, the closest train station was Richmond train station, and it was at the end of the line. And if you were leaving Sydney, you had to visit all the other stops to get to Richmond. And I think the same thing is true with intrinsic motivation. We try to get all those things extrinsically, and we think that's going to bring us happiness. The houses, the clothes, the watches, but then you realize there's no joy in things. And then you get to the end of the line, you get to Richmond Station, you go, shit, there's nothing beyond this. I better look inside. And it's a
Right.
journey to get there. And some people found their passions early on. I know with my daughter, Nikita, she's 13 next month, she has a passion for art. And she started having art classes at maybe 4 years of age. And so she's already been on that journey for 9 years. And she found that. But she's also been in an environment, a family environment that supports that. Because most of the environments here in Taiwan is the parents won't support the arts. They'll say, you'll never make any money being an artist. That's not going to get you anywhere. That's not going to help you get into high school. That's not going to help you get into university. So sometimes those passions become repressed for a lifetime. My son Caesar, he loves to read. I don't force him to read. He loves to read. And the other day he was really pissed off. He's only 8 years old and he said, Dad, I'm pissed. And I said, what are you pissed about? He said, I've read 16 books. These 16 books are 280 pages each. And he's pissed because episode 17 of this book is not available. But it's a passion. So he says, Dad, could you walk me down to the bookshop? So he wants to walk 1.5 kilometers to the bookshop to see if it's available. But it's his passion. And it's good that he's got that because we can support that. He's also got his skateboarding, and it's rare. He has had private lessons every week for, I think, 3 years now, and he loves it. It's his passion, it's his outlet. He gets to express his individuality on the skateboard. But there's so many other parents who say skateboarding is not going to make you money. Skateboarding is not going to get you into medical school. You've got to be a doctor. You've got to be a lawyer. You've got to be an accountant. Go and do something that you don't like for 30 years or 40 years. But he's got his passion. And I think if people can find something that they love and they throw their mind, body, and soul into it, they won't want to poison their body and miss an opportunity to do that thing that they love.
Yeah. So I really feel that addiction um, is, arrives and is created around this idea that you're trying to cope with something that isn't right. So a form of mental friction. And so, to your point, if you're raised in a culture where you're um, raised to pursue something that maybe not be your passion because your parents are telling you, it's going to solve this other problem, but you don't relate to it and it's not what you want intrinsically, then you're experiencing mental friction because you're living a life that may not be in alignment with your identity, the life that you want to live, the roles that you want to have, the profession so on and so forth. And so you're right. I mean, that can create an environment where people then are filled with friction, and then they are looking for ways to find relief.
There's addiction in my family. And when I look at my life, I know that alcohol could easily become an addiction. It was an addiction for my grandfather, but I'm very consciously aware of it. And so I choose to use that addictive behavior in business because I don't think addiction's inherently positive or negative. I believe it's important in how we use it. I was addicted to sports and I would get up early in the morning and I'd practice. I'd jump on the trampoline for 2 or 3 hours a day. I might ride for 4 or 5 hours on a weekend. And I used that addiction in an area that I got a healthy reward. In business today, I'm addicted to my business. It's an addiction. I'm going on a holiday um, at the end of the week, and I've got to tell myself, Daniel, don't work. Don't work whilst you're on holidays. Don't take your laptop. I'm addicted to it because I love it, but it gives me that intrinsic drive. I want to do it. I struggled with study when I was younger because I had linear sequential learning disabilities, and learning was really hard for me. But I've also found that with addictive behavior, it's helping me study a lot. It's helping me read more than I ever have before. And I wake up and I want to read. I want to stay up late and I want to read. And so it's just redirecting it. I'm going to have an addiction, but I may as well just choose a positive one that gets better rewards. It's going to make me live longer, live happier.
Yeah.
So finding how to use it, I think, is critical in my world.
Yeah. Instead of addiction, we can call it intense recurring motivation.
We've got it. George, thanks for joining us. Where can our guests learn more about the wonderful work that you're doing?
Yeah, come visit me on at my website, which is georgehaymaker.com. You'll also find me posting a lot of stuff on YouTube and LinkedIn. And I have a professionals club where professionals can come and make transformational changes to their lives, find the identities that they want to live by, rewire unhelpful mental patterns, um, whatever it is that they're wanting to accomplish in their mental experiences. I can help you do that at the neurological roots of your brain. And so, yeah, love to hear from you.
George, thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Daniel.